Welcome back to the Bull Moose Ledger podcast, the number one podcast in niche dental accounting and tax podcasts out there. I am joined by my partners Ryan Walsh and Andrew Witt, along with our producer, engineer, Thomas Still. We're here in Milwaukee, kind of right before the 4th of July. I think first things first, we go into a little bit of a sports cast and talk about, Giannis is left. Are we going to be okay, Ryan?
Well, I'm not really sure if we're going to be okay, but I think I'm ready to move on.
I think they'll be
not
more
getting
fun
season
to watch.
tickets again. Is that what you're saying? Or
Uh,
are we going to own the future?
well, I don't know. They might be cheaper this year, so maybe it's a good time to buy them.
What do you think, Andrew? We get in on season tickets again?
I think they'll be better to watch this year than they were last year.
It was pretty painful.
Yeah, last year was painful for sure.
All right. In this episode, we want to try to convince you, if you're a younger dentist out there, why it still makes sense to buy a dental practice. And you hear all sorts of talk that the DSOs are going to take over, that private dentistry is dead. This is something that happens. I'm old enough that it's happened every 5 years since I've been doing this. So we want to talk to you about the process of buying a dental practice, why you should buy a dental practice. And I just want to kick it off with, to me, it's a math equation as to why you want to buy a dental practice. And I just want to use an example that if you're in a practice that is collecting about $1 million a year, so what I would say an average to a slightly above average type dental practice, if you're in there working as the associate, and we have kind of a normal dentist to hygiene split of 70-30, where the dentist collects 70% of the revenue and hygiene makes 30%. If you're the associate in there and you're making 30% of your collections, you're probably topping out at $210,000 of compensation. If you own that same practice and you have a pretty normal overhead of 55%, you go from $210,000 a year up to $450,000 a year in total compensation. And if you look at that over 20 years, that's nearly $5 million of additional compensation you're going to earn. You are going to have a retirement asset that you can sell that practice at some point out into the future, above and beyond what you have in your 401k and your home and all those things. And we're still in an environment where banks are providing 100% financing at very low interest rates. I mean, we're still seeing rates at about 5%. They're lower than mortgage interest rates if you were to do even a 15-year home equity loan or things like that. So to me, I mean, it's a big math thing that's out there that you're going to make a lot more money. If you're working as an associate within a practice, you're going to be running a lot of the day-to-day anyway, so I don't know that you save too many headaches. But, Ryan, if somebody's interested in buying a practice, I mean, how much experience do they need to have? What do they need to have in place in order to go out and buy a practice?
Yeah, generally we see from the banks that they want to see about 2 years worth of experience from the buying dentist, and that kind of is in line with, they want to see some assurance from the buying dentist that they're able to keep up with the production level that the dental practice is currently at. And by that I mean the practice that they're interested in buying. So they want to see about 2 years worth of experience from the dentist.
And I think maybe some production reports or things like that just show, hey, you're able to go in there and, if it is a practice where they're collecting $700,000, you're somewhere within hailing distance of that, correct?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
You talk a little bit of, down payment, things like that. I think people worry about, if you're to buy a traditional business or, the food truck we've talked about opening, you're going to need to put a down payment down. What's the case in dentistry?
Well, actually, generally, they don't require a down payment at all. Most, sometimes they do, but mostly they don't. But they're going to want to see some sort of equivalent asset to the, at a 10% equivalent asset right? So like they're going to want to see maybe a 401k or some other type of collateral that reaches about the 10% level, but not require the actual down payment.
And that's not, they don't have to go out and liquidate their 401k or anything
No.
like that. I mean, it sits there and it just shows that they have some financial wherewithal and are kind of a train
Right.
wreck on that side.
That they just have it just in case is basically, all they need.
So, I mean, I think as you can see, I mean, the bar is, I don't want to say the bar is low. I mean, you have to get through dental school, you have to go through all those things to get there. But it's not a case where we need 10, 15 years of experience to buy a practice. I would say most of our clients who come in and buy a new practice are somewhere between 2 to 5 years. Andrew, if you could talk a little bit, I mean, if you have the experience, where's somebody going to go look to buy a practice and identify some targets that they might be able to potentially buy?
Yeah, I mean, if you're starting to look for a practice, you're typically going to start out talking to a broker, a dental broker. They'll have a number of listings, or they'll know practices that might be coming on the market soon, and they can put you in the right direction of who to talk to in terms of doctors. Other options are if you know any supply reps from bigger supply companies, you can talk to them. They usually have relationships with many doctors and dentists who are thinking about selling on the fence or are close to retirement. So that might be a way to skip the broker part and go straight to the source. You can also do networking through dental associations or study clubs. Those are good ways to get an eye out for doctors that are looking to sell. Or you can just send out letters in the area you're looking for and gauge interest that way. I mean, all these are good options. Typically you'll see or start with a broker, but supply reps, networking, and then taking it into your own hands are good options as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the supply rep thing has changed over that. I remember when I first kind of got into it and you had guys like your dad, Dave Witt, out there. Those guys knew everything that was going on within a practice. It could be, just the industry in general, that it's all a relationship kind of thing. And the more legwork you're willing to do in developing some of those relationships, you're probably going to be able to better find a diamond in the rough or something like that. And the brokers are obviously a good resource, but some of the best practices never get to a broker.
Yeah, I mean, I would honestly say supply reps could be better off than reaching a broker. I mean, they know more about the practices than a broker might know.
And one thing I would say too, I mean, going that DSO route or the DSO method of sending out letters, we always have our own clients who get somewhat interested. They get a letter from one of the DSOs out there, and they might be tired that day, and they start thinking, you know what, maybe it is time to flip somebody else the keys. So it's a relatively inexpensive way to kind of introduce yourself to the market. I think some sellers are going to value brokers. The biggest thing I think they can offer to some extent is a concept of confidentiality. You'll have non-disclosure agreements and things like that. Most people who are selling don't necessarily want the word getting out, but there are other ways aside from going to the traditional broker to buy a practice, for sure.
Yeah, I think if you hit a dentist on quote unquote a bad day with a letter and they're dealing with a payroll issue or a human resource issue, you could definitely gauge interest that way and get something.
Kind of like if we got one on April 16th from a accounting DSO,
Yeah.
we might be more prone to listen than other days. Once you've kind of looked at practices, you've identified some targets, you have a few places you might be interested in. To me, there's some professionals you have to go ahead, I think, and hire and get on your particular side. I'm going to do the advertisement for a CPA. I think you need a CPA, preferably somebody within the dental space. There's a lot of people like us out there who have kind of a dental niche, if you will, who would be well suited to identify the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and all those things within a practice. And I think you want somebody with a valuation background who understands how these practices get valued, can interpret a valuation report, that if there's problems, they're able to communicate to the other side of things. I would be really afraid of going in. There's some of the brokerage companies now have started their own accounting thing, and they'll have their accountant review a practice that their broker is selling. Well, quite frankly, are you going to get the best advice in that situation? And again, to me, it comes down to math again. If I have a practice that's collecting $1 million, and this is, let's say, generically, it's going to sell for $800,000, that broker can get upwards of $80,000 of commission to sell that practice. I'm going to need a lot of accounting revenue and a lot of years invested with that particular client to generate $80,000 of accounting revenues. So to me, they're always going to have a bias, in my opinion, to get that practice sold. And I don't think you're necessarily going to have an advocate on your side if it's dual representation. I think you're going to want to get an attorney involved in the process early on. I don't know that they specifically have to be a dental specific person, but they should be somebody who understands business law, understands contracts, I think understands professional services. There are several banks out there who talk to dentists who know the market as well, but getting your bank relationship and starting to pull together some of the information you need for the financing allows you to move quickly through the offer process. And there's banks like PNC, US Bank, and any number of banks that have dental specific programs that will do 100% financing. And I think finally, some people like to bring a consultant into it right from the jump who is maybe well versed in looking at the operations of a practice, can help suggest improvements. I don't know that they're necessary to do it, but I think it's a possibility. So once you've identified a thing, to be able to have professionals on your side who can help you move quickly and make decisions quickly, put you at a competitive advantage in terms of making an offer on a practice. Once everything is put in place there, I mean, what does that process look like, Ryan, in terms of identified the practice, you got CPAs involved and everything like that. What do we have to tackle next?
Well, I think, after you've identified the target practice, I think the first step is to start gathering materials. We suggest gathering at least 3 years worth of tax returns and financial statements. I would also gather production by provider reports and possibly the valuation report. If the practice is up for sale, more than likely they've done a valuation report themselves. You're gonna want a copy of that, and you're gonna want to get your CPA to review these reports as well, and the financials and the tax returns. I think it's very important to review these documents as carefully as you can and make sure that they're all lining up. I think that one of the most important things is to make sure that the financial statements actually match the tax returns that were filed. It seems pretty much common sense, but I think it's a very important first step. So you gather the materials, you have your own independent CPA review these materials to confirm that they look accurate and they look right. And then once you've done that, if everything looks right, and you're still interested in this practice, then I think the next step is that you have your attorney draft an LOI to the target practice to sort of take the practice off the market.
And Ryan, just backing up, what is an LOI and what does that give somebody in terms of a legal agreement?
Well, it stands for letter of intent, right? So it's basically the buyer just putting out there that they intend to buy the practice at a particular price. And what that does is it basically puts a placeholder in place so that the practice is essentially taken off the market, and you know, is sort of, you know, not closed, but it's, you know, that you have a signed agreement that the, you know, if all things go well, that you're going to buy this practice at this particular price.
So basically, I mean, if I'm going in and buying a practice, it allows me to kind of go through the, you know, these next steps are going to like due diligence,
Right.
and things like that. It doesn't bind me to necessarily I have to buy the practice now for sure.
Right, exactly. Right. So right. So after you have a signed LOI in place, that's when you want to do the due diligence that you stated. So like that LOI allows you to then be able to do more due diligence because you've stated your intent as a serious buyer for the practice. So that allows you to then do the due diligence, you know, and verify everything that's been given to you. You can do like kind of a higher level verification, you know, chart review, that type of stuff. The once you've done that, if everything still pans out and everything looks good after that, then you're going to want to go to your bank and finalize your financing, right? So once you've done that, then you have your attorney create the legal agreements between you and the buyer. Make sure that everybody is in agreement with how everything is going to transition. Is it going to be an asset sale, a stock sale, etc.? And then the next step is the closing.
Yeah, and I think one important thing, I mean, on the financing and establishing that relationship with a bank is usually by the time you're able to put in a letter of intent, the bank will essentially be able to give you sort of an equivalent letter of intent that they are willing to lend to you. I mean, and there's a difference. When you go through the banking process, and we'll probably get into this in a later podcast at some point more in depth, but they will generally kind of give you something to say, you know, you're credit worthy and here's exactly what we think we are going to lend to you. And I think once you push through and you're about to finalize, that's when the bank comes through with a commitment letter that everything is good. They lock in the interest rates and all those things. But, you know, similar to your letter of intent, that's something that could give a buyer or a seller some assurance that you are a legitimate buyer. You've been vetted by the bank already, and the bank is willing, you know, based on your credit, to lend. So I think that's a really important step to go through. What, in terms of legal agreements, Ryan, what kind of legal agreements are we talking about? Probably like an asset purchase agreement. You know, do we see some bumps in the road when we're drafting the legal documents?
Yeah, you can. I mean, you can have bumps in the road, certainly. But you know, in terms of legal agreements, it's like you said. Like, is it an asset sale or is it a stock sale? I think more often than not these days we're seeing asset sales. And then, you know, if it's an asset sale, it's how much, you know, what assets are transferring and what's not, right? Like, you know, like what equipment is for sale? Is the building included? Is the building not included? You know, things like that.
Yeah, to me, I mean, once you've kind of gotten through that letter of intent process, usually the drafting of legal agreements, where it's always gotten tricky is if the selling doctor is going to stay on as an associate. Sometimes there can be a little back and forth on that, but usually all the legal agreements are going to do is really formalize what we've already done in the letter of intent.
Right.
So that is the process of everything you're going to go through to get to there. You know, and it's important to understand that, but I think it's also important to understand, you know, if you're going out to buy a practice, understanding what you're looking for, what some qualities of a good practice or a good target are. And there's a couple things there. I mean, the first thing I would really look at very hard is geography. And I know brokers will tell you, and we can tell you the same thing. If you're willing to live in a rural area, you are going to likely make more money as a dentist than if you want to live in an urban area. However, I think as we all know, ultimately you're going to want to practice where you want to live. So geography's an important element of things. I think just from dentistry and orthodontics and all those things are things that require some small level of community involvement in it, whether it's being involved in your kid's school in the future or community groups and things like that. So you have to be somewhere where you want to be on it. I would look at practices that have some opportunity on it, and there's two things I would look at it just in terms of opportunity. Actually, three. The first one is I look for practices with a high hygiene production. Because if I see a hygiene production over 30%, what I see is a selling doctor who's taking a lot more vacation and who is maybe watching things instead of proactively going in and fixing things. There's opportunity to grow that top line revenue right off the jump. You have a stable patient base and there's some deferred maintenance then within those charts. The second thing I would look for is a practice where you can go in and maybe add some procedures. So if you're somebody who's comfortable with oral surgery on some level, you're comfortable with endodontics on some level, comfortable with some simple orthodontics on some level, and this practice refers 100% of it out, that's going to be a great opportunity for you. You can go in and organically build the production within that practice and not have to pay for it on the front end. And I think the third thing is if you have a practice where you can expand the physical plant of it. And what I mean by that is, let's say you have a 4-operatory practice. Is it landlocked? Is it always going to be a 4-operatory practice? Or is it in an area where you can expand, you can knock down some walls, and that 4 operatories can become 7 operatories? That's a really important thing. If you look at how dentistry is practiced today, dentists like to be able to pop between rooms now more often than they did back in the old days. So you want to look at something where you can add production without necessarily paying for it on the front end. I think you do want to make sure you can replicate the production that the doctor's doing. So if that doctor's doing high-end implants and you have no idea how to do high-end implants, might not be a great fit for you. Or if they're doing things like oral surgery or endodontics and you have no wherewithal to do that, practice probably isn't a very good fit for you. I would look at the prices within the ballpark. It's still a seller's market out there. You want to be within 10%. I mean, if you have your CPA look at things, they may determine a slightly lower value, but you have to understand in today's market, somebody is probably willing to buy the practice at the asking price. And then finally, in a perfect world, I would want a freestanding building. I think we look at all of our clients and the ones that do the best, I think the best advertising you can have as a dentist, taking away a good website or Google AdWords or direct mailers or things like that. If you have a freestanding building and you can put a nice sign up in front of it, to me, that's the best possible advertising a dentist can do, and generally the best indicator that that practice is going to be successful and can grow. So those are the things you want to look for. Andrew, what are some things that should be red flags or explored more in depth if you see them?
Things to look out for, I would say number one is the broker valuation that's completed. I mean, this is essentially where you're going to get the price range of practices in. I mean, banks need it, you need it. It's a good metric to measure with the practice. Now, with the valuation, you want to watch out for too many adjustments, and you want to make sure all the adjustments are logical. At the end of the day, valuations, it's not rocket science. You should be able to understand exactly what's going on. In a valuation, the broker's going to make adjusting entries, normalizing entries, where you're taking the current numbers and you're kind of getting rid of the fluff, any tax advantageous expenses that might be on there. So for example, if the current practice has their kids on the payroll, you would adjust that out because you're necessarily not going to have your kids on the payroll. It's a tax advantageous expense for them. On the flip side, if you see adjustments where they're lowering staff wages to a certain percentage, that might be something you want to look more into. because like again, if we use logic here, if you take over the practice on day one and you tell the staff, hey, you're getting a decrease in your wages because that's what the valuation said, that's not going to go over very well. So just make sure, look at the adjustments, make sure there's not too many. If there's too many, you can kind of look at the valuation and it might seem like the broker was trying to get to a number instead of a logical adjustment, essentially.
Well, and how many, come across our desk where you just simply can't follow ultimately the logic in things? I think we've seen, the ones where they have mistakes where they're like, well, usually dental staff wages are 27%, and even though this guy's been running at 33%, we're going to magically wave our wand. But just trying to follow the logic sometimes.
Yeah, and wages, that's always sensitive because it all depends on the location you're in. Wages might be higher in one city compared to another. And again, like a lot of practices will overpay staff a little bit if they're really good because they don't want to lose them. If you lose a staff member who's good because you're not going to pay them enough, it's going to be a pain to try to find a new one. Hiring good employees nowadays is not the easiest to do for dental practices.
No, and that part's way different than what it was in the past where you could just get the next person up and it would be no problem. Trying to find a good hygienist or dental assistant or front desk right now is not easy.
Yeah. So, the valuation, that's the number one thing to look out for. If a broker senses you're hesitating a little bit or you're questioning the valuation or you're getting cold feet a little bit, which is understandable, it happens, it's a huge purchase, they may try to use a pressure tactic such as a phantom buyer to kind of get you moving forward. So be wary of that. And then your emotions when you're looking to buy a practice, be patient and realize it is a big purchase. It can be a smart purchase, but just be patient. If you don't fall in love with the practice, if you see red flags, there's many out there that are good and that you'll have the opportunity to buy.
Yeah, I think going back to, I just had an example a couple weeks ago with the phantom buyer where my client was looking at a practice. It was on the market for somewhere around 18 months or something like that. And we were just kind of in the back and forth where we were just asking clarifying questions and stuff like that. And then magically, some DSO was interested in buying the practice. And the client got panicked and we just kind of said, there's no other buyer out there at this point for this practice, and it's certainly not a DSO. So, you do have to watch. I think once they think they have you on the hook, they're trying to reel in as best as they can to close that transaction.
Yeah.
There's some mistakes that we do see our buyers make, and we want to discourage people on the front end from making some of these mistakes. I think the first one's is a paralysis by analysis, where you're trying to look at every little thing, and you don't want to minimize. You're going to go out and this is maybe the biggest purchase you're ever going to make in your life, or certainly the second biggest purchase you're ever going to make in your life behind your home. But in a lot of cases, you're going after cents instead of dollars on some of these things, where you might be trying to squeeze the seller down. And as we said, it's a seller's market right now. It's very difficult to squeeze people down off price. And you get too much into your headspace where even though you have a good practice there, it may have a flaw or two or things that could be fixed, that you jump away from it. I think the second biggest thing is people don't have, just as a society, we probably lack some empathy out there, but have some empathy for the seller who is out there. And the reason being is they're nervous to begin with. They're seeing their life's work is now going to be sold. It's going to go to a new dentist. The thing that has defined them for the last 20 to 30 years is now going away. They're moving into retirement. They've had a broker who has likely come in and told them, all right, your practice is worth X. So the more questions and the more picky stuff you do with that buyer, the seller, you're going to turn that person off and they're going to move in a different direction. I think one of the reasons DSOs have been successful in buying practices is they act decisively, and they look at the numbers and it's a go no go with things. They're not doing a lot of back and forth with things. So that kind of comes into the next thing. Be decisive with your actions. I mean, if you look at a practice and you and your advisors think it's a no go, it's a no go. You don't have to try to make it work. Conversely, if you think it's something that everybody signs off on, be decisive in your actions. Get the letter of intent. Keep the ball moving on everything. I think our clients need to understand, I don't know if chain of command's the right word for this, but in a transaction, I think my best advice is doctors talk to doctors, accountants talk to accountants, lawyers talk to lawyers. Don't try to do a lot of back and forth with the other professionals that are involved in the process. Keep things clinical. When you're talking to the doctor, talk about clinical stuff. Don't talk about numbers with the doctor. I think the same way, most consultants will come in and tell you when you're running your dental practice, you might have somebody who is the treatment coordinator or whatever, who after you've diagnosed something actually sits down with the patient to tell you how much it costs, because people don't want the dentist talking about how much it costs. So again, just respecting different professionals are going to do different things within the negotiation process. And then lastly, I think people have seen TV shows like House Hunters and stuff like that, or negotiating things and thinking, I have to win this negotiation. And let's say you're looking at a practice listed at $700,000. We've been accused sometimes, where we look at the value and go, yeah, it looks like $700,000. Well, isn't there something we can do to beat this guy up to sell it for $650,000? And there's really not. I think two things to keep in mind again. It's a seller's market out there. Somebody will buy it at that price. And keep in mind, the buyer has already been told what the price is. And dentistry is not like, sometimes you'll see houses hit the market and whoever the real estate agent is will place that house under market value. And we all know it's under market value, and the whole intent is to start a bidding war. Dentistry doesn't work that way. It's not like you're going in and going, well, they're listed at 700. 9 times out of 10, and probably even higher than that, if you offer 700, they're taking that number and they're going with it. So there's not a lot of back and forth on that. Certainly if something is grossly overpriced, that's one you're not even going to go to the letter of intent process on, and you can skip right past it. Any other mistakes you guys see in it?
No, I think you covered it pretty much all.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so that wraps up this episode. Again, what we want to encourage people to do, I guess our welfare depends on this a little bit, that private dentistry survives, but it's still a great time to buy dental practices. I think it's still a great business to be in. Have you guys ever had a client who's gone out of business?
No.
As a dentist? I can't think of any.
No.
So people are still going to have teeth. I think there's always going to be an element of DSO out there, and they're going to appeal to a certain type of patient. Not unlike our industry. We have H&R Block and we have TurboTax and things like that, and that's going to appeal to a certain client. But I think there's always going to be room for dentistry. It's always going to be a profitable business that is out there. That's going to be a great career and business decision for somebody to make. In our next episode coming up, we'll be talking about practice evaluations and what goes into those, what normalizing entries you should be looking at, what kind of multiples you should be looking at, and what determines that. And until next time, for Ryan Walsh, Andrew Witt, and our producer engineer Thomas Stilp, have a happy 4th of July, and we'll talk to you soon.